Testing, hold on. Testing, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to call the meeting to order. Everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Seated. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Deb. I'm Louise Dinsmore, Chair of the Charahoe School Committee. Thank you so much for attending the annual Omnibus Meeting, where our superintendent will present the fiscal year 26 budget. Before we begin, I'd like to highlight some important information and dates of future meetings where the fiscal year 26 budget will be reviewed and discussed further. The school committee was presented with the fiscal year 26 budget last week at our monthly meeting. We will be meeting again on Tuesday, January 28th for a budget workshop, and our February 11th school committee meeting will be the approval of the budget. The annual regional school district public hearing on the budget is scheduled for March 4th, with the adoption of the budget scheduled for March 11th. This format tonight allows school committee members and the administration to listen to your recommendations relative to the budget prior to our upcoming meetings. Before the superintendent begins her presentation, let me mention that if you have any questions, please save your questions until the end, and you will be acknowledged and called on by the chair. Since we are regional neighbors, let's take a few minutes to introduce ourselves, as there are a number of new faces around the table this year. So we'll start with Danielle at the end.
I'm the Finance Director for Richmond.
Thank you. And if you could all, we have to share microphones this evening. If you could all speak clearly into the microphone, because I do believe that this meeting is being recorded.
Hi, I'm Karen Pinch. I'm the Town Administrator in Richmond.
Jeffrey Dinsmore, Town Council, Richmond.
Mark Reynolds, Town Council, Richmond.
Dan Madnick, Town Council in Richmond.
Ed James, Town Council, Hopkinton.
Sharon Davis, Town Council, Hopkinton.
Robert Burns, Vice President, Hopkins Town Council.
Good evening, everybody. Mike Geary, President, Hopkins Town Council.
Good evening. Jasmine Roy, Town Council, Hopkinton.
Good evening, Brian Rosso, Town Manager, Town of Hopkinton.
Good evening, Sylvia Thompson, member of the Hopkinton, the Charahoe District Finance Committee, representing Hopkinton.
Good evening, Larry Phelps, Hopkinton.
Good evening, Elizabeth Monty, Finance Director, Town of Hopkinton.
Tyler Champlin, School Committee, Hopkinton.
Polly Hopkins, School Committee, Hopkinton.
Patricia Pouliot, School Committee, Richmond.
Jessica Purcell, Charahoe School Committee, Richmond. Karen Reynolds, Charahoe School Committee, Richmond.
Angela Brazil, Administrative Assistant, and Clerk of the School Committee.
Louise Dinsmore, Chair, Charahoe School Committee, Richmond. Good evening, Gina Picard, Superintendent.
Good evening, Gregory Zanian, Director of Administration and Finance.
Good evening, Colleen Grubin, the Assistant Director of Finance and the District Treasurer.
Good evening, Michael Kameller, Assistant Superintendent.
Good evening, Laura Chapman, Charahoe School Committee, Vice Chair, Charlestown.
Good evening, Linda Lyle, Charlestown Representative on the Charahoe School Committee.
Hi, Donna Chambers, representing Charlestown School Committee.
Craig Luzon, Charlestown School Committee.
Jeff Allen, Town Administrator for Charlestown.
Deborah Carney, Charlestown Town Council President.
Stephen Stokes, Charleston Town Council.
Megan Cotter, I represent District 39, Exeter, Richmond, and a little sliver of Hopkinton.
Elaine Morgan, District 34 Senator, which I represent Hopkinton, Richmond, Exeter, West Greenwich, and piece of Charlestown.
Thank you, everyone. I just want to remind everyone that before the superintendent presents her budget, we'll hold questions until the end, and please use your microphones when you do have questions. And I would ask, too, that we had a request not only to use the microphones, but if we can refrain from sidebar conversations, because that picks up in the microphones, and it might be hard for the members of the audience to hear. Thank you so much. Gina?
So good evening, everyone, and welcome to the FY26 Omnibus Budget Presentation. I want to thank the entire Charahoe team for all of their efforts to collaborate to ensure we present a budget that serves the needs of our students and families. This budget ensures Charahoe stays on track to provide high-quality and rigorous public education to all of our students. As we move closer to the budget vote on Tuesday, April 8th, it is important to know that all numbers presented today are based on the governor's preliminary budget presented last week. We are here to provide a transparent overview and answer any questions you may have as we work towards promoting and encouraging strong academic performance while being fiscally responsible to our schools and the community. And I apologize ahead of time. I'm probably going to lose my voice every now and then. I am recovering from the flu, so your patience is appreciated.
So all budget documents are available on the district website under the Administration and Business Office section. We try to update it as quickly as we have new information to put on it. And transparency and accessibility are cornerstones of our budgeting process. So we try to be as open as we can throughout the process. So this slide indicates the impact to the town members. The annual inflation rate for New England was 3.3%, above the national average of 2.9%. We're coming in at a budget of 3.2% for our FY26. So we are below New England's inflation percentages. Enrollment shifts across Charlestown, Richmond, and Hopkinton are reflected in these calculations. There have been many questions regarding how each town pays per pupil. The chart on this slide provides that information. Charleston, if you're looking, I'm not sure. Well, 3.2% before state aid. Sorry, the 3.2% increase is before state aid. So after state aid, it's 2.10. Charlestown has the least number of students, but it pays the highest per pupil rate, as Charlestown does not receive as much state aid as Richmond and Hopkinton. Some of the budget items that of course increases are salaries and benefits. An increase in health care. We were advised that health care course in New England will raise 15 to 20% over the next year. Science curriculum materials had to be updated with new curriculum. Utilities have gone up. Building ground supplies, we are seeing increases in our field and facility needs. Out of district transportation, DCYF tuition amounts, and facility needs for capital projects, especially the cost of stage 2 and stage 1 applications required by state law.
So this was a slide presented at the Rhode Island League of Cities and Towns, and that it was showing overall how every district performs in relation to their budget. So Charahoe is very proud to be in what they named the quadrant of success as presented. So this means we achieve strong assessment results with a strong return on our financial investment. The graph uses shading to indicate the percentage of disadvantaged students, while the size of each bubble represents student enrollment. Additionally, it features a vertical dotted line denoting the average per pupil expenditure and a horizontal dotted line representing the average RICAS math and ELA proficiency data. These lines divide the graph into the 4 quadrants, providing a clear visualization of district performance relative to its fiscal investment. Only 8 high schools out of 55 high schools in the state of Rhode Island ranked in the top 10 in ELA, math, and science, and Charahoe High School is one of them. This reflects the dedication of our educators and the hard work of our students as the work at the high school begins in pre-K.
This graph shows local funding versus state funding. And if you look at that, Charahoe revenues from the state funded sources have increased at a faster pace than local taxes. The increase in state aid was driven by career and tech and regional transportation funding.
So this slide shows that the Charahoe revenues from state funding, the teacher compensation makes up approximately 50% of our expenditures, as they are our largest investment because they are the ones in front of our students every day. You will also notice as enrollment declines, the number of FTEs have also declined. So FTEs are what we call full-time educators.
So state aid, as of today, based on the governor's budget, is $15,304,248. This was presented on January 14th. So that is what we're currently using to base our budget off of. And we are also using an estimate of career and tech tuitions of just over $3 million for next year.
So grant funding remains a critical component of our revenue strategy. Through initiatives like Project Aware, the bipartisan Safer Communities Grant, and the USDA Project Scales, we have secured over $3 million in multi-year grants this year alone. This funding allows us to innovate and enhance opportunities for our students and staff and remain focused on Vision 2026.
So fund balance, I'm sure there's going to be some interesting conversations around that tonight. The Government Financial Officers Association recommends a fund balance equivalent to 2 months of expenditures. So for Charahoe, that would be between $10 and $11 million. Currently, our school committee policy sets the fund balance at 2 to 4%, which poses potential risk. Our auditors have advised us to increase this to 7 to 10% for fiscal stability, an issue we need to address as we move forward. For this year's budget proposal, we have allocated 2.25% for the fund balance.
The best way to navigate this budget season is through a spirit of collaboration. Our students and families are counting on us to work together for continued success. This year has been remarkable for Charahoe. Our district has excelled in many ways, from earning the prestigious U.S. Department of Education Green Ribbon Award to achieving 5-star and 4-star ratings for 3 of our elementary schools and our high school. These accomplishments highlight the outstanding efforts taking place across all of our schools. We have also made significant progress in key areas, including academic systems of support, mental health, outdoor learning, green initiatives, and farm-to-school opportunities. This year alone, we secured over $3 million in grants, established green teams, developed paid student internships through grant funds, and launched our Waste Warriors program at Richmond Elementary School. As a Rotarian, I draw inspiration from what is known as the 4-way test, and I believe it can provide us guidance as we embark on this new budget season. The first question we ask ourselves, is it the truth? We are committed to presenting an honest and transparent budget that reflects the true needs and priorities of our district. Is it fair to all concerned? We strive to balance the needs of students, staff, families, and taxpayers to ensure fairness and resource allocation. Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Collaboration, open communication, and community engagement are essential to building trust and strengthening relationships that support our schools. Will it be beneficial to all concerned? At the heart of every decision is our unwavering focus on what benefits our students. Together, we can meet the challenges ahead and continue to build on our district's success. I would be remiss if I did not reiterate that in a time when our national inflation is 2.9% and New England inflation is 3.3%, the fact that we continue to develop budgets that are much less than inflation is a credit to the entire Charahoe team. Thank you for your time and dedication as we present with our state aid a 2.1% overall increase to the Charahoe school budget. We ask that we all move forward as a united community for the benefit of all of our students and families. Please, I know the chair mentioned it, but we ask you to mark your calendars for upcoming budget presentations and workshops, the next one being Tuesday at 6 p.m. here in the library.
Thank you, Superintendent Picard, Mr. Zenyan, for your presentation. We'll entertain questions from those on the dais. Ms. Davis.
I sent out a memo to the school committee. In the past, I evaluated Section 3's budget PDF and created a suggested reduction list for the Charahoe School Committee to consider. This time, for the FY26 budget, I again evaluated Section 3's budget PDF, created an Excel spreadsheet of the 75 E-codes that show an 8% or higher increase in FY26 over FY25 costs. Calculated the dollar change and sorted from highest dollar change to lowest dollar change. I am now submitting the attached document to the Charahoe School Committee to conduct further analysis and create its own reduction list. I am aware that I only looked at increased items that were not salary or benefit items, except for the benefit health E-code. I know the budget also has FY26 items that have been decreased from FY25. I also know this is the first year that the new Director of Finance has submitted a budget. However, as a Hopkinton resident, I am expecting the school committee members to do their homework and create their own list of reductions. Hopkinton cannot accept, and what was handed out before was a 6.57% increase for Hopkinton this year, and would appreciate your help in reducing this figure. The form that you just gave us shows that state aid has increased. That's the reason why it went for Hopkinton. The increase has gone down from 6.57 after the state contribution to 2.41. However, I still think that the school committee members need to create their own lists. They need to do evaluations. They need to meet with the Director of Finance, because I've done that in the past and it has been very helpful for you to understand the complexity of what goes into the budget. It's especially you really have questions, so you should meet with the Director of Finance and get your questions answered. Thank you.
Sharon, were there any line items that you wanted to highlight from your list from a high-level perspective?
Well, you know, my favorite is the benefit health line, because it increased $464,000 over FY25. And that was a 6% increase. I just think it could be less. It's like a fund balance, but for health costs. And I just kind of think that it could be less. And I was going to ask the Director of Finance, what is the year-to-date spending on benefit health?
We're currently negative $45,000.
Negative?
Yes.
So you spent all of your 669,000?
Are you talking about the proposed budget or last year, where we are currently in that? Because we have used the entire healthcare fund balance, and it no longer exists.
It no longer exists. So FY25 is adjusted for 669,000. I'm sorry, 6,697,194. So have you used all of that now, only in a half a year?
Our year starts on July 1st, and
Yeah.
we are, I received our last statement last week, and we are negative $45,000.
Okay, that was one. I will say that I noticed that you really put my athletic awards, which are trophies, you put it in its own little category. So we're spending $6,000. You're suggesting that we spend $6,000 on trophies, and I still question that.
So I just want to remind you that your code is not just for award.
That one, the 6119, I looked. It's
Give me the code, Sharon.
61.
61.
Hang on.
The majority of our awards are thankfully produced by the Charahoe Boosters. which do a wonderful
6115.
job.
6115.
Okay, we'll take a look, Sharon.
Supplies honor awards. And it went from 5447 to you want 6313. 15% increase for trophies. I have a problem. And that's minor, because it only changed by, $1,000, but it's my favorite pet peeve.
Understood.
But I'm really, really excited that we got more state aid, and even though your costs have not gone down, the impact to Hopkinton has drastically reduced.
Yeah,
I
at the
appreciate that.
meeting prior, the finance meeting, my ask of our state senators, our state reps, the town council, is that we collaborate together to really focus on the work around unfunded mandates and how the legislation can utilize the current budget as it exists to reallocate funding, specifically the money we talked about around statewide transportation. I explained to the finance committee that statewide transportation, just the contract is $9 million before any bus hits the road. Charahoe, as many of you know, is 128 square miles. We are the largest regional district in the state. No other district has to provide that level of transportation. Now, while Governor McKee has fully funded regional transportation, thanks to our support at the senators and rep level, and the lobbying, Governor Raimondo did not, and the previous governors did not. And when that happens, it impacts local taxpayers and state taxpayers. So if we could reallocate the statewide contract, just the 9 million, to reallocate it to districts around that level of work, things like audit districts, tuition, special education, then you can ask the districts to do it at a much cheaper rate. Because right now, if I call the state and say, I can do this at a cheaper rate, they will remove our state aid allocation for funding, which would then cost us more money. So it's one of those things where it's a rock and a hard place. I'm glad to say that the legislature is looking at it. They have a transportation commission that they put together that is actively meeting and providing recommendations. And what I ask is that if we all, and I'm happy to let you know when that's coming around. I know our representatives typically will email me as well. I appreciate Rep. Carter when she's asked me to come down and lobby for that work. But that's one where the most voices will be impactful for us because it is one of our largest expenses. It's over $4 million in Charahoe. So that contract no longer is efficient for the state. So if we can band together to collaborate around the unfunded mandates and request, I haven't read Rep. Chippendale's complete legislation, but I'm hoping somewhere in there it's specifically asked that legislators who put bills forward will ask for fiscal impact statements in order to see how much is it going to cost and where is it coming from. So I think for me, I think nickeling and diming everyone's budget while we all continue to do it, the way to really, where the rubber's going to hit the road is going to be to really push on the General Assembly to rethink education funding formula and the unfunded mandates that continue to come.
I agree. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Rep. Cotter?
Thank you, Chair. So Representative Spears and Representative Senator Gu and I, we're going into our third year in the General Assembly. I'd just like to point out that in the 3 years, every year, there's been an increase to the funding for Charahoe since we have been elected, and we will continue to push for more funding for Charahoe. The regional transportation funding is something that, I personally have been pushing year after year, and I appreciate you coming. I believe Jess Purcell has come to testify. Catherine Colasante put in a letter of written testimony for that. Putting that bill in again to change the funding formula so that that is included, as you said. I represent 2 regional districts that are both over 100 square miles. And when you compare that to, let's say, Central Falls, that is 1 square mile, it's incredibly important that we fund our transportation. There's also another bill I'm putting in. It came to me from the superintendent of Exeter West Greenwich that will, if you can bus your children at a cheaper rate within in-house, then you can do so and you won't be penalized. So that I put in last year. We passed it in the House. It didn't make it through the Senate, unfortunately, but hopefully this year it does come through the Senate. I also just had a couple of notes that I wanted to talk about. I think it's February 10th that folks can come to the State House and testify for the Transportation Commission. I spoke to Terry, who's the chair of that commission, to kind of get an idea of how that's working. There is a couple things that they're working on. One is they are partnering with RIPTA to get kids from Pawtucket, Providence, and Central Falls to Davies Career and Tech School. It's a pilot program. If that works and it's successful, then they might be able to launch that in other parts of the state, which would be a huge help for Charahoe, obviously, with the transportation budget. Charahoe's part of the pie is about 10%, the 800,000 for private schools. It's 10% of the state's spend on that. So that's a pretty big piece of that pie. And so I think this commission's really, really important for Charahoe. So I really urge everyone to come on February 10th and talk about that. And then one other thing, Hopkinton's piece of the budget is obviously much higher than everybody else's. In Exeter West Greenwich, we passed a 5-year rolling average. So that way, Exeter and West Greenwich, neither town has a huge increase in 1 year at the 5-year rolling average. So your average of 5 years, how many students you have. That way, neither town has a huge spike, doesn't cost a whole lot of money, and it passed overwhelmingly among the two towns. I think that would really benefit the Charahoe School District. That's all I have.
Anyone else? Brian?
I just wanted to say, budgeting obviously always comes with challenges. And I take my hat off to the school committee. You guys have a challenging job. Coming from Hopkinton's perspective, obviously we'd like to see things reduced given the increase that we're facing with enrollment. One of the things that I wanted to point out was that when we look at the budget and the school committee analyzes this budget, if you could take a look at the expense side of things rather than the net of the state aid and look at what the true expense increase is. And I know at the end of the day, we know state aid comes into play, but we've seen in years past where this is the governor's budget currently, and we've seen it get haircuts in the past. So if we're factoring in the governor's projections and then it goes to the finance committee or the House and it gets a haircut, which I think we could all say that's probably a good possibility given the state's budget, it ends up falling on our shoulders. So if the actual projections that are put into your budget, and I've seen this in the past, gets reduced by $50,000, $100,000 on a state level, it's already baked into our budget. So that hit comes to us. So we're not receiving what we anticipated. So I think there's just two ways to look at it. The net between, the expense, the education expense, less the financial aid, state aid, but try to take a look at the increase of the on the expense side specifically, because we don't know what state aid is going to actually come to when at the end of the day. The other thing I wanted to ask was on the transportation aid. How was that budgeted in here? Because I know in years past, it's always a complicated thing to budget because we don't know if it's going to be fully funded on the state level. I know we've gotten help from our legislators to get it fully funded in the past, but we always have to fight for it. Is that currently being budgeted as if it's going to be fully funded this year?
It is.
Okay.
I'm a member of the legislative committee on the Superintendent's Association. So we've met with both leadership of the General Assembly as well as the governor's office. And what they've continued to tell us is they're not looking, if it's not in the governor's budget, you're less likely to see it. If it's already in there, it's less likely to come out. So that's why we've been meeting with the governor's team as well to ensure. So what they've said is, if you have ideas for allocation, and that's what we've given them for the transportation and the statewide contract, they're willing to move that money to help public schools. I've also heard from the leadership around, digging deeper into charter schools. I mentioned that at the finance meeting. Charter schools receive the same level of funding, whether they're educating elementary students or high school students, regardless, which is why they can offer before and after school care and we cannot. So I do think that, again, Brian, many of the General Assembly members are listening to that conversation, and we're less likely to see those level of haircuts based on the coordination of the Rhode Island League of Cities and Towns, the coordination of the School Committees Association, and the coordination of the School Principals Association, because we're all right now finally beating on the same drum.
Okay. That's good to hear.
If I just may speak to Gina's point about collaboration and the unfunded mandates. There were a number of school committee members this weekend, myself, Laura Chapman, Jessica Purcell, who attended a school committee 101 training session. And there was a school committee member from Warwick who spoke at the end of the day's festivities, the trainings, that talked about how there are power in numbers and that Warwick was taking a look at all of their unfunded mandates and the impact of the mandates on their budget. And they totaled them up, category by category, and it came to about $16 million. And he, is lobbying Rep. Chippendale. And if we could perhaps do the same and take a look at what our line items are for unfunded mandates and make a collaborative effort with our legislators to, there's power in numbers. So are there other districts that can do the same so that the powers that be at the State House realize what we're dealing with respect to unfunded mandates? And he strongly encouraged us, the school committee member from Warwick, to take a look at our budgets, put together a very clear, 1 or 2 page document about what the fiscal impact is on the unfunded mandates. And, all of these, school districts and the regional school districts, if we can make that plea for more assistance, and, I'm sure we would welcome the opportunity to collaborate with our legislators. Megan?
A list of what the unfunded mandates are at this point, or are you working on that? Because we're happy to help with that.
So I get there, we do have the list, but what I actually want to make sure that we're all sort of using the same UCOA codes. I've asked Mr. Zenian to reach out to Warwick directly to find out which UCOA codes they pull from, because Title 16 alone, if you just go into Title 16, that's all the education law. There's a ton. The ones, obviously, that impact Charahoe the most are our transportation, our special education services. So just a clarification, in the federal funding formula, in the funding formula for the state, we only get reimbursed for high-cost special education. That means it has to be 5 times more than the core instruction. That's not typical of what you see around special education. Those are typically our significantly medically fragile students, feeding tubes, physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech pathology. They have a host of needs. So only when it's 5 times the cost will the state reimburse you the high-cost special education. So Rhode Island, unlike Connecticut and Massachusetts, is one of the states that does not fully fund special education. They do not fund DCYF tuitions. When I started 5 years ago, our DCYF tuitions in Charahoe were $55,000. It's developed through legislation formula, and now it's over $100,000 per student. We have professional development. Over the last 5 years, we've definitely put in over $1 million of professional development based on the Nathan Bruno Act, based on the teacher evaluation updates, based on the Right to Read Act. So while they're all very well-intended bills, they come with financial impacts to the districts and the local taxpayers, and then we take the brunt of that. So what we're putting together is, we'll actually reach out to Warwick, and I've asked him to also reach out to RIASBO, which is the Business Officers Association, so that we can all get on the same page, because I do agree with the chair that if every district is going to compile the cost around the same UCOA codes and the unfunded mandates, and we stay at those higher levels, the ones that have the biggest impact, I do think the majority of our numbers will show the General Assembly that we need action. Yes, Rep. Spears.
Apologies for my tardiness. Just looking at your budget, and I think I did this the last time we had an omnibus hearing. Looks like about 85% is personnel. So we talked about the expense line. Would that be who does the finances? I'm sorry. Would you say that's an accurate statement?
I would say 80 to 85%.
Okay, so we're looking at a 20% total of this district's budget, which we're looking at about 60 million. So the starting point for what we potentially could cut out of cost for a budget this size is small comparatively. So I just want to put that in a perspective for the public and for everybody who's talking about finances here. And just pause on what Superintendent Picard has just mentioned about students with disabilities and students in DCYF care who are the most vulnerable in our schools. And the thought of actually addressing that with a fiscal proposal is disturbing to me, so I'm just going to say that publicly. And I think generally speaking, yes, the General Assembly should respond and support our schools. But when you think about talking about unfunded mandates, I'd also like the committee to look at what's the cost of unfunded mandates and what's the impact to the students and our community should we decide not to pursue those unfunded mandates like advanced curriculum or supports to students or supports to kids with disabilities. So I just want to put that out there when we're talking about finances. This is education, and we need to take that first and foremost before we just make blanket statements that we're all going to fight about money collectively about unfunded mandates. The General Assembly has a responsibility to respond to our town and our taxpayers, but I just want to make that public statement.
Thank you. Thank you. Is there anyone else around the table before? Jess?
Committee meetings, the school committee members talk first, but because everyone else is here, I wanted to make sure that if folks wanted to say something, they could. So what I want to say relates a lot to what has already come up as far as transportation and state mandates. We know that there are state mandates for high-quality curriculum materials, services to students, but there's also mandates that help ensure all students in our towns have access to education, even if they don't attend schools in Charahoe, private schools, charter schools. So state law requires that all public school districts pay for transportation to private schools within a pre-designated transportation zone. The yearly cost for this in Charahoe is about $800,000. So this is a cost across all cities and towns statewide that costs about $34.6 million, which is about a quarter of the state's total transportation costs. And so that's why this joint legislative commission has formed, and I'm interested in the work they're doing, but I have concerns, like with some of the research I've been doing, it sounds like one of the solutions proposed is that the state covers all transportation, which to me is not a solution, because we're seeing that the statewide transportation system is causing inefficiencies locally, that we have Ocean State Transit is right next door to us, and they do a wonderful job within our district. I'd like to see them used further for greater efficiency of services. So I think we need to keep an eye on that commission and provide input. I know February 10th, I saw that. I heard that as a date. I haven't found that on the website, the meeting materials for that commission, but I am on the lookout for that. I think this is a big issue that affects all school districts, and I think we can work together. Not only do we want the service to be more efficient, but we want it to be more transparent. And that I think that we can fulfill this mandate much better locally. And, please reach out to me if you'd like to be connected. I can keep you, informed as I learn more about it as well. But I think this is the kind of thing that I don't expect it to transform our budget, because as mentioned, the most we spend is on people, not just students, but the folks that are in the schools with them every day, taking care of them. But I think this is the kind of thing that we can work together and over time make positive change and reform on. And I think it's specific enough, but also big enough to have an impact across the state.
Thank you. Seeing Laura.
Hi. So I think everybody had some really great points here tonight, and I just want to say that I'm new to all this, and I'm not really familiar with some of the dynamics, but I think that it maybe a discussion could be had at some point between the three towns, whether or not there is a way. So, because let's just say that the state, for example, they continue on with these unfunded mandates and they make this, a priority, and they say, okay, well, no, we're not gonna do that, and there's really nothing that can be done, and then it's left on the schools, and then it's left on the towns in order to, to kind of foot that bill. So, I'm just wondering if there's another approach to this where, so there's some places in Rhode Island that are doing a something called a homestead tax, where they're looking at different how their homes are valued and the assessments and things like that, and then they're basically saying that if you're a year-round resident, then you stay at this tax rate, and if you have a vacation home, for example in Charlestown, then you would get a different tax rate. And I know that they do it in other states, Vermont, Maine, they all have something similar to that. I feel like that we're a regional school district, and part of that is, it was probably formed for the purpose of there's different economic advantages to each of the different towns. When Charlestown has Seafood Fest, they're getting all of the kids and all of the families that are coming from Hopkinton and Richmond, and vice versa. When there's the Hop Arts Festival, all of our kids go over there. So there's definitely some congruent things that are going on between all three of the towns. And I'm just wondering if there's, maybe another way to sort of look at how to help this burden that seems to be escalating year over year. Because when I look at the budget, it's a pretty consistent increase for all three of the towns. So that's all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, seeing no other questions from, okay. Sylvia?
Yes, I wanted to reiterate what our treasurer, Brian, had mentioned, that the fact that our state aid, as it's probably a good number, and as we get increased a tremendous amount here, it has made it the percentage and the impact to Richmond and Hopkinton and Charlestown significantly less, because we didn't get similar numbers from the previous year. We're getting a significant boost. But that's not a reason not to have you guys do a hard look at each and every individual budget item. So the fact that we get more state aid doesn't mean that we're always going to get that number in the future. It fluctuates. It has over the years. We're lucky to get more this year. But I would urge the school committee to do your diligence and go through the budget line by line, however you do it. The second thing I wanted to bring up, and I know I talked about this in the district finance committee meeting, and I know that Gina disagrees with what I had proposed. And I was trying to get everyone to think about getting rid of the 2 to 4% with policy, and instead return that money to the towns in the way that you do it, and you do it in your budget. Whatever amount is given, that's the amount that's taken off. If it's 38% for Richmond, they get 38% back. So I understand that the auditors have not recommended that at all. And I would like to point out that I had mentioned in this letter that Charahoe has never used the 2 to 4% policy. They've never needed, whatever amount you keep, they've never needed for an emergency. And Gina pointed out and went through a list of different things that she said, no, that's not true, that we actually did have emergencies. So what I would suggest, however, is that I provided a chart that shows that Charahoe has had a surplus every single year. And the example that I used, which was a huge emergency, and it cost more than 1.2 million, and that was when the Hope Valley Schools some years ago, the repointing of the bricks, found out that it was in the budget to repoint the bricks, and they found out that they were not attached to the columns. So it turned out to be a huge expense, unanticipated, not budgeted, but yet the schools still continued to have over $2 million surplus, even though that was an unexpected expense. So I understand that everybody would be more comfortable with some amount, but I would urge you to return as much of that with the way that you do in the budget. and keep a smaller amount, because every time there's an emergency, there's been one at Richmond, different things are going to break down throughout the year, things are going to happen. And every single year, you have a surplus, and every single year, you've met those emergencies within your budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Counselor Reynolds?
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to respond to Ms. Thompson's comment. I believe that further reducing the fund balance would be completely fiscally irresponsible of this school committee. We have auditors telling us that it should be more. And we have developed a policy of 2 to 4%, which has worked for the district over the years. It gives us the cash flow needs that we require during the year to pay bills before payments come in from the towns. It gives us a pool of money that we can tap into when we have emergencies. And it's worked well. And I would take the auditor's word over what's the best approach to take over Ms. Thompson's word, with all due respect to her. That's who I'd be talking to, because we don't want to get a negative note on our audit report that, oh, wait, their fund balance is inadequate. And what's that going to do to our bond rating if we have to go out to bond, which hopefully we will be doing as we have more and more projects. So it's completely fiscally irresponsible to even suggest such a thing. And I would urge the committee not to do that. The other thing I wanted to bring up, Ms. Davis mentioned the benefit health line. And this kind of goes under the title of let's not be penny wise and pound foolish. A few years ago, the committee took a chance and reduced that line, saying, oh, you know what, our experience in the past hasn't been that great, so we're going to reduce the health benefit pool of money that we have to pay for health needs of our employees. It got reduced, and as Mr. Zenyan just pointed out, the committee made the wrong decision, because a little bit more than halfway through the year, we've already exhausted that entire fund. So it's not as predictable as you might think. You need to leave some wiggle room in some of these accounts. And this is one that's there for a reason. And as we have aging elementary schools, which the community's decided not to rebuild, the chances are going to get greater and greater that we're going to have an unforeseen problem in one of these schools that we're going to have to tap into this fund balance for. So not to beat a dead horse, but I would urge you not to do that.
Thank you.
Hey, Chair.
Counselor Gary?
Yeah, Chair, for the record, I disagree with the counselor's thoughts on Sylvia and Sharon's workups on the numbers, just for the record.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else around the table before we go to the audience?
One last
Sylvia?
thing I would add is the cities and towns need fund balance. The town of Hopkinton needs to have a fund balance, and I think it's 2 months. Yeah, all right. So we need a fund balance of 2 months. And the reason we carry a fund balance in the town of Hopkinton is because we don't get our tax money until it starts coming in September. So Charahoe sends us a bill, we have to pay the bill. We get the bill in July, we need to pay it. So that's why the cities and towns carry a fund balance. Thank you.
Thank you.
You could also look at it a different way, Sylvia. If the towns ask the state to give the money directly to the district like they do in EWG, then you wouldn't have to carry your fund balance in Hopkinton at all.
Okay, we are going to go to the audience. I'm going to ask everyone that would like to speak from the audience to go to the podium, speak into the microphone, state your name and the town where you're from. Mr. Colasanti?
Good evening, everybody. Mike Colasanti from Richmond. I'm going to start off with the fund balance. Richmond, the first audit I received in the 23-24 fiscal year, it said right there, basically on page 5, that a 10% fund balance was good for the town of Richmond. Then there were figures of 16, 17% thrown around. But it said right there in the auditor's report, hard copy, black and white, 10% was fine. What I proposed was a reduction in the fund balance of about 1.5% to offset tax increases in the fiscal year 23-24. And again, not to be disrespectful to Mr. Reynolds, but he got up at the podium and he said that's a foolish idea to use the 1.5% to offset your tax increase for fiscal year 23-24, because next year you're going to pay for it big time, that you're going to have to put this money back in and you're just putting a Band-Aid on the wound. In fiscal year 24-25, we had a slight tax reduction in the town of Richmond. So that didn't come to fruition. So now when you look at history, that's what you're going to look at. Your health care. How many times have you been in a negative cash flow in the health account? It's been a long time. You're looking at 1 year. Your track record's been good. Getting into the mandates. When I stood here, when I was on the council, first elected, in fiscal year 23-24, I mentioned the mandates. And I said, what we should do with our state reps is any new mandates moving forward, the state pays for them. And then we'll revisit the mandates that are already on the books. Now you got Representative Chippendale that is proposing that legislation right now. I was kind of ahead of the curve a little bit. And Mr. Gary, he mentioned not too long ago, I think a week ago, that Mike mentioned that 2 years ago. So it's my humble opinion that I think the school committee can do two things. They can get a waiver for the mandates, such as new curriculum in this fiscal year. And I would, encourage discussion on the school committee to put this on a future agenda. And then also another humble suggestion is that the school committee can come up with a good resolution that can be sent to all the cities and towns in regards to the state funding the mandates. And if Charahoe can be a catalyst, that would be dynamite. And let me tell you something, there's been more and more talk about the state funding these mandates. I've talked to other, school committee chair people around the state, and there's more and more traction to the state funding these mandates. Warwick, it's costing about $16 million. The mandates has been a pet peeve with me. And the chairman, we've talked about this, and I put a figure of about $15 to $18 million. It's what it's costing Charahoe. And I'm not talking about eliminating the mandates for the students that really need them. Let's start with the mandates that don't affect the kids in the school systems that need the programs the most. That's a small portion of it. So when you're looking at our total budget of $65 to $70 million, we're looking at these mandates costing this district in upwards of 25 to 30%. And I'm not even saying going after any of the payroll. I want good employees. Payroll, and no matter what it is, private sector, public sector, it's always the biggest cost. And even if the balancing act is that we have a few more teachers to the ratio of students because our student population keeps decreasing, as far as I'm concerned, I really don't care too much about that, because if we have a few more teachers to student ratio, I'm hoping that the students get a better education with the extra teachers here. I'd rather go that route before we start cutting payroll. And even back in the early 90s, when I was on the council the first time, I never advocated cutting payroll. That's the easiest thing to do. You have to have no expertise whatsoever, financial background, nothing, to say, let's cut payroll. That's the biggest portion of the budget. I'd rather see it stay intact because I want to see, the kids get the best education that they can. It's the mandates. The mandates, when you're looking at costing this district $15 to $20 million, I've already done some of the analysis, Gino. And, the state legislators that are sitting here, you passed the bills. You already know what the mandates are.
We didn't.
Well, you have, well, you can get a list of the bills because the bills come from the General Assembly. So it'd be easy for you guys to pull these and come up with a figure yourself. And then we all come together and we see how much they're actually costing all these districts around the state. We got to get things under control. One last thing. Governor DePreet signed the first billion-dollar budget back in the 80s. Now it's over $12 billion. You're talking about the bridge over there that's going to cost $500 million to replace. I only say that because, something, I've always operated in the private sector. If our costs went up that much, there would be no businesses left in the state of Rhode Island. We wouldn't be able to survive. We've got to get things under control. So let's go for the second biggest portion of our budget, and that's the mandates, and we can do it.
Thank you. Representative Cotter?
Just to be clear, we have not passed any unfunded mandates in over the time that we've been there. So in 2 years, we have not passed any additional hardships to the budget. In fact, we've advocated to reduce the hardships here. And one other thing, you're looking at the budget, after you take the 85% out, there's $14 million roughly left. So of that $14 million, I don't know what the figure is of unfunded mandates. We're happy to look at that, and we really would like to help. But I just want to make sure that we're getting our facts correct, and we have the right information when we're talking about it.
Thank you. Is there anyone else from the audience that would like to come up? Thank you, sir. Your name and the town where you reside?
My name is Gary Stoner. I reside in the town of Richmond. And I just want to ask the school committee and the leaders of the school committee to do the public a service and educate the public a bit about mandates. There's a lot of discussion about mandates, and they're made out to be this evil thing that the state puts down on the school district. Now, in my experience and my understanding, some of those mandates have to do, as was discussed, with educating students with disabilities, and the importance of doing so is stressed through public laws in the state of Rhode Island as well as federal laws. But I would suggest that there's not a very good understanding of mandates. It was suggested that a list be created. I think that's a great idea. But I also think it's important to recognize what's the benefit to the students in the schools of these mandates. What are you mandated to do? And what does it cost you? But also, if you don't follow those mandates, what does it cost you? Because there are some things that are held over your head. If you don't do this, then you will not be eligible for certain state funds. You will not be eligible for certain federal funds. And I'll stop there, but I ask you, please, to educate the public about this word that is bandied about as some evil thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Come on up.
Hi, this is Chris Kona, Richmond. I want to highlight a couple things with regard to the fund balance. So first, while Mr. Colasanti had mentioned that Richmond saw a decrease in taxes last year, that was due to the increase in housing development that we had in Richmond. So it was more related to the increase in that residential income that we got from revenue from the folks in Richmond, more so than anything we did with the fund balance. Also, that adjustment to the fund balance was rejected in referendum by the people of Richmond when it was proposed. Thanks.
Thank you.
So I know the chair's asked me to just provide some examples around the unfunded mandates, and I absolutely agree with the gentleman that just spoke, as well as Rep. Spears, that I believe all of the legislation is well-intended and it has good intention behind it. The issue is, as we all know, the funding has to come from someplace, and it continues to be placed on the local taxpayers, which then almost puts us at a disadvantage because we seem to be fighting on, it feels like, on different sides, when in essence, I think we would all agree that our students need the best education possible, and we need to provide that to them. And some of the, I think I said, the biggest mandate that has the largest impact on us, obviously, is the transportation. That's one of the largest concerns, and one that I think can be rectified without impacting families and students. The other one is professional development. So we all know that our teachers, just like any good doctor, nursing professional, you continue to increase the level of need because things change. And none of us are going to go to a doctor that, got certified 50 years ago to do, an appendectomy and cut us wide open when we can do it laparoscopically, right? So as in any field you learn, professional development is important to continue a teacher's craft to ensure that they're innovative and that they continue to engage students. However, again, the health and wellness regulations that have come up, all well-intended, but they have impacts the district. The Nathan Bruno Act was a wonderful piece of legislation, but it came unfunded. So we were able to access grant dollars and able to help us get the youth mental health grant to certify all of our teachers and to get that professional development. We actively look for those grants to be able to push that away from the local taxpayers. We utilize our ESSA funds on the Right to Read Act. Again, excellent legislation to support students with dyslexia and to support students' level of learning how to read before grade 3. That was amazing professional development. Our teachers have said it's some of the best professional development they've ever had. Well-intended. Without ESSA dollars, it would have been a huge impact to the budget. So I think knowing, and I'd be happy with, so we do a e-update every month. I'd be happy to add some of that work because I think anytime we can educate our community around what we need, because I agree with you. I also think sometimes when we say unfunded mandates, that it does give an appearance as that it's negative. But I think what we're saying is a lot of the work is good work. It just needs to know how we can fund it so that we're not continuing to go to the same water hole. And we're all competing for really great things, but there's just not enough to be able to impact that work. So I do want to say that I agree. I mean, our kids aren't widgets. I don't think, we all know that. We're not creating a product. They all learn at different speeds. They all have different level of needs, and every family counts on every single one of our educators and staff to ensure they're doing the best for every one of their students, regardless of their need. And I'm really proud of the work the district has done. The strategic plan, every line item in this budget is crafted around Vision 2026. The level of work, and I see, some of our leaders, teacher leaders in the district, because I'm a believer in that your title doesn't make you a leader. It's the work that you do every day. And I am proud to be able to come to work every day with Charahoe educators and Charahoe staff who work diligently to ensure that every time we look at every child, we're ensuring that we do what's best for that child at that moment. So the work is excellent. I think when we do talk about unfunded mandates, it's more about making sure that we all are on the same page about how we're getting that funding and how we can do what's best. Because while I'm happy that our state aid is coming across well, and we see a 2.1% increase, many of our neighboring districts are over 4% because they did not see the same level of state aid education. And I also think educating yourselves around the funding formula and how that works is really something that would behoove all of us. I know Senator Pearson is one of the legislators that has the really excellent working knowledge around the funding formula and has been a strong advocate for education around the funding formula.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Yes. Let me go to Rep. Cotter first, and then Counselor Gary, and then we can go back to the audience. Rep. Cotter?
Just to be clear, one of the reasons why I have not advocated to reopen the funding formula is because we will most likely lose funds. That is not something that we want to happen in our district. If anything, we want to ensure that transportation is included in the funding formula, not reopen it. So I'm not in favor of reopening it. I think we will be very disappointed if that happens, and it will not be great for taxpayers. The other thing is, then you talked about the Nathan Bruno Act. I mean, it's so important for teachers to know about suicide awareness. What does the cost the district? What is that cost to the district? These are things that I think are important for us to know.
So Dr. Camilla, the youth mental health grant initially, when we had to do the upfront costs,
The grant was for approximately $26,000, which included professional development. We trained 13 teachers in the district to be trainers. So we did a train the trainer model, and then they trained all of our faculty, staff, many other staff who work in the buildings, custodians, cafeteria workers, et cetera.
How much was it? $26,000.
Around $26,000 through the grant.
Through a grant.
we were able, right, we advocated for access to grant dollars to be able to alleviate the local budget, which, and again, we're the only district that has 100% of our teachers trained.
But that didn't cost the district any money.
No, it costs, what we're saying is, it definitely had impact across the state, but we alleviated through grant dollars. And I'll be honest with you, we have a director of development and sustainability, Katie Karakosian. She's worth her weight in gold because the level of work that we put in Katie's office is extensive. And not only does she write the grants, but then she manages the grants, and she sits in on all the administrative meetings, all the teacher meetings, and she listens and then looks and searches for the things that are going to directly align to our strategic plan, so that we can take all that $3 million that we've advocated for was all to sunset, so that we don't have to put that in the local budget. So we're one of the very few districts that can do that because we have somebody like Katie.
Thank you. Counselor Geary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think it's an excellent idea what the gentleman from Richmond said about the mandates. I mean, if I can get a copy of it, I'll get it on my agenda for a town council meeting one night, and I'd have one of these outstanding council members from Hopkinton come in and explain it to it. You know, just like anything, the more you explain stuff, the more confident you get. You have a little bit better understanding of what exactly is that might be holding us up, what the state holds us for ransom for, as Rep. Cotter said. But I think it'd be good if myself, maybe President Carney, President Wilcox, got a copy of what the mandates exactly are, and we can go from there. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Great suggestion. Yes, sir.
Good evening.
Your name?
Clay Johnson from Richmond. We talk a lot about spending, and I want to talk a little bit about where the money comes from. We talk about, I believe all the spending we're doing is well-intentioned. I don't think anyone has an evil agenda. But we have to balance that with where this comes from. And when we talk about where this comes from, we talk about the average taxpayer. In Richmond, we say it's the average Richmond taxpayer. They're making $120,000 for a family income. And I think that family can afford another $200 a year. Not a big deal. But we don't talk about the more vulnerable. And as we look out 1 standard deviation, 2 standard deviations in terms of income, I want to share with you what that looks like. So this is a retired couple, 67 years old. They're living off Social Security income. Total income is $52,000 a year. Their house is paid for. They're paying $5,500 in property taxes, $320 in fire taxes. They're paying $700 a month for food, $100 a month for home insurance, $100 a month for home repair, $600 a month for health insurance. That's the Medicare premiums and supplements. $500 for basic utilities, electricity, heating, cooling, water, garbage. $200 a month for discretionary. This is the cell phone, the cable, the internet. $100 a month for semi-discretionary, clothing, personal care, entertainment. $600 a month car payment. $50 a month for car maintenance. $900 a year for gas. $100 a month for car insurance. So their total unavoidable household expenses are $44,000. They have $157 a month in discretionary income. And we talk about these budgets like it's just another cup of coffee a week. And that cup of coffee a week impacts some of these families a lot. And we have to understand, is the juice worth the squeeze? Are we doing more good or more harm? And we really have to look at these families, all families, not the average family. And are we really saying some of these families that have lived here for 50 years need to leave? And their future is in your hands too. So I would ask you to consider that when you're looking for the additional cup of coffee a week. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else from the audience? Did you have another thought, Mr. Colasanti? Okay.
I was on the council, always advocating for the taxpayer. Even in my ending remarks, I was the only one that didn't talk about myself. I talked about the taxpayers. I talked about the taxpayers every time that they got up at the podium, practically in tears. They would be scoffing to my left. And the administration didn't care. And the reason why we had a small decrease in the taxes, even though the grand list went up, is because I and Helen Sheehan put the pressure on the council and the administration not to spend every dime like they have been doing. So fiscally, everybody has to be a little more aware of the people that live downstream, because we lose sight of them. And that's who I am here to fight for. And again, yes, the grand list did go up, but Richmond, in a little over 10 years, the budget has gone up 82%, more than Charahoe percentage-wise has gone up. That you can't, all right, argue with. 4.1 million 12 years ago, now it's 7.7 million. And the reason why there was no tax increase last year is because we put pressure on the administration not to spend every dime that was coming in. We have to do that all the way around. Charlestown, Hopkinton, and the school committee.
Thank you. I do have a question, if you don't mind, for the town administrators or the town council presidents about communication to the district regarding new housing developments and what the forecast is for potential new, residences being built that might down the road in the next 5 years plus impact the enrollment of the district. Are the towns communicating with the school department about those projected developments that could have an impact on the budget down the road? I threw you a curveball. Sorry about that.
Nope, that's okay. So Deb Carney from Charlestown. Right now, Charlestown has 2 applications that have been filed. One is for over 400 units and the other one is for over 80, but they're just in the preliminary stages. So how many actually get approved, we don't know. If you'd like going forward, when we do get in large applications, we can certainly forward them to the superintendent.
Yeah, I know. In the past, the towns have been very cooperative around that work. The last, I think, analysis we had to do was when Hopkinton was looking at Brushy Brook. I think was at the beginning of my tenure, about 4 or 5 years ago.
Thank you. Mr. Geary?
Yep. Thank you, President Carney. For our growth ordinance, we generally allow 10 houses a year. Right. Unless there's affordable housing that we're still working on.
Thank you.
So yeah, I would just add to that we'd be happy to share that information with you. It's definitely, as you all know, it's kind of a moving target. A 5-year projection on housing is kind of throwing a dart at a wall. I mean, we certainly know if things are in the planning stages, preliminary plan, master plan, those we could relay to you, but 5 years down the road it's hard to predict that, I would think. But certainly any information that's useful for you on your end, we'd be happy to share.
Thank you
And
so much.
I just asked last week for the planning department, our planners in Hopkinton, to update, because I had a list of all the developments coming up so that the school committee would know. and they agreed to look at the list, and they're going to update it. And as soon as it's updated, we're going to share it with you, because you need to know how many houses are we looking at? Is it over 5 years, over 3 years, or whatever? So that's being worked on.
Thank you. And I just asked that question because, the school committee is trying to figure out the status of Hope Valley Elementary moving forward. So that's a real factor that we have to consider. Counselor Roy?
Hi. So I may say something that may upset a few people, but however, when the school committee looks at the budget, they may want to take into account, and the unions may not like this, but a performance-based pay or some type of bonuses, things like that, because I have a small child in elementary school, and, I hear about the high school, I hear about, all this stuff, but the learning is not, it starts there. But what I'm saying is performance-based pay may help the budget.
Is there anyone from Richmond that could speak to any prospective developments? Karen or anyone?
Yeah,
Thank you.
I also agree with Brian that anything out 5 years would be next to impossible to predict at this point. But we're certainly willing to share any information through our planning department of any developments. There is a new development, Richmond Place, coming up. I don't honestly know the total number, but it is on Stilson Road.
Okay, thank you.
We can get some information for you.
Thank you, Karen.
I do want to say all of the town managers have been nothing more than cooperative with the district. And I don't necessarily know that if everyone really realizes the level of support that we get from the towns, especially around, that my favorite calling of school days for winter. I'm sad to see the second EMA director in Richmond leave, as, Randy Gemini. I know, and I don't know how he was part-time because the man worked full-time. But when I tell you phone calls at midnight, phone calls at 3 a.m., phone calls, throughout the day when we're predicting a storm, while it may be like the night before for many of you, we were talking 2 weeks of prep and preparation around some of those storms. Ron McDonald at Hopkinton, the level of coordination and communication for me to make informed calls around our EMA directors. So while I know we're talking about the school budget, I just want to be clear. I do feel as though at the administrative level of your towns, your town administrators and their offices work every day very diligently with us in coordination, back and forth with communication, whether it's locator cards, whether it's support around truancies. Sometimes it's not happy stuff, but I know that I can call Brian, Karen, and Jeff when we need something. And I do want to thank them because, and I also want to, I asked the new council members to really talk to your town administrators and find out how your EMA directors work with us, because they're doing large levels of work and sometimes they don't get the credit. Same thing with our police, amazing. Richmond, Hopkinton, and Charlestown coordinate all kinds of events. And unfortunately, there was a school shooting in Nashville High School today. And when I tell you the level of safety and security that we have around the support of our chiefs, our firemen, I know we're losing Chief Lee, but I don't think the towns get the credit that they deserve around the collaboration, because while, yes, we have elected officials on the table, there are people every day in the town halls, along with the Chara House staff, that coordinate to ensure that our families and our towns are collaborating. So I do want to say thank you to them, because I don't think all of you get the credit that you deserve. And I appreciated it. Those nice articles about, I'm waiting for your article, Jeff. Nice articles about Karen and Rhode Island, League of Cities and Towns. Did I miss it, Jeff? But I do want to say thank you, because they're all doing, great work, and they're really working with us. And while I know sometimes politics can blur that, I want you to know it doesn't get missed in my eyes. So thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments from our group or from the audience before we entertain a motion to adjourn? Okay. Hearing none, may I accept a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Who was seconded? Sorry.
Who seconded? Okay. Okay, all in favor? Aye.